The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Madeline Walker stepped onto the wooden planks of Cottonwood Creek's main thoroughfare, whispers following her like vultures circling carrion. Her head remained high despite the weight of 1,000 cutting glances, her honey-brown hair swept up beneath a modest bonnet that had seen better days. It was the spring of 1876, and honesty, it seemed, was a luxury few could afford in this frontier town, especially a woman alone. "There she goes," someone hissed, "the woman who ruined the mayor's son." Madeline clutched her market basket tighter, knuckles whitening against the woven reeds. She hadn't ruined anyone. She'd simply spoken the truth when asked about Richard Hargrove's gambling habits and womanizing ways when his father had inquired directly. Now, she was paying the price for her candor, dismissed from her position as schoolteacher and shunned by those who once called her friend. The dry Wyoming wind kicked up dust that clung to her skirts as she made her way to Mr. Galloway's general store. She'd need supplies before leaving town. There was nothing left for her here, not anymore. "Miss Walker," the shopkeeper greeted her stiffly as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "What can I help you with?" "I need flour, coffee, and salt," she said quietly, "and perhaps some ammunition for my father's old revolver." Galloway's brows shot up. "Planning a journey, are you?" "I am." She met his eyes directly. "I've been offered a position in a settlement further west. The teacher there has taken ill." This was a fabrication, but a necessary one. No one needed to know she was heading to her cousin's homestead with no promise of employment. No one needed to know how desperate her situation had become. "I see." He gathered her items without further comment, though his movements were brusque, betraying his disapproval. When she reached for her coin purse, he named a price nearly double what these goods would normally cost. Madeline almost protested but swallowed her words. This was the cost of truth in Cottonwood Creek inflated prices and cold shoulders. She paid without comment and turned to leave, only to collide with a broad chest covered in a dusty denim shirt. Her packages tumbled, and she let out a small cry of dismay as her precious flour spilled onto the floorboards. "Whoa there, madam." Strong hands steadied her. "My apologies." Looking up, Madeline found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer sky. They belonged to a man she'd never seen before, tall and sun-bronzed, with sandy hair peeking out from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A stranger, then. One who hadn't yet been poisoned against her. "The fault is mine," she murmured, kneeling to salvage what she could of her provisions. The stranger knelt beside her, helping to gather the scattered items. "Nonsense, I wasn't watching where I was going." His voice carried the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. "Name's Caleb Irving, just rode into town." "Madeline Walker," she replied automatically, then winced. In moments, someone would inform him of her pariah status. Mr. Galloway cleared his throat. "Mr. Irving, if you're looking to provision yourself, I'd be happy to assist you once you're finished." The implication was clear enough, finished with the town disgrace. Caleb Irving's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile never faltered. "That's mighty kind, but I believe I caused this lady some inconvenience." He stood, dusting his hands on his trousers before addressing Galloway directly. "I'll be taking a replacement bag of flour for the lady on my account." The shopkeeper's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for water. "Sir, perhaps you don't understand. I understand plenty," Caleb said pleasantly, though there was steel beneath the words. "A sack of flour, if you please." Something in his stance, perhaps the easy way his hand rested near the holstered revolver at his hip, convinced Galloway to comply. Madeline watched in astonishment as the shopkeeper retrieved a fresh sack and placed it on the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Irving, but that's unnecessary," she began. "Just Caleb, please." He smiled, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "And it's entirely necessary. I ruined your provisions." As they exited the store together, Madeline felt the weight of watching eyes. This would only fuel more gossip, but somehow, walking beside this tall stranger, the burden seemed lighter. "You're new to town," she stated as they reached the hitching post where a handsome chestnut gelding waited patiently. "You should know that being seen with me won't do your reputation any favors." "Is that so?" He secured her packages to his saddle with practiced ease. "And why might that be, Miss Walker?" She hesitated, then decided that if he was to hear it, better from her than as a twisted tale from someone else. "I spoke truthfully about a powerful man's son when asked directly by his father. The son was engaged to a friend of mine, and he was unfaithful and reckless with money. When the mayor asked me if I thought his son would make a good husband, I couldn't lie." Caleb studied her face, his expression unreadable. "And for that, they've turned on you. Truth is rarely welcomed when it disrupts plans or shatters illusions," she said simply. "The mayor had political aspirations for his son. My friend married him anyway, and now they both despise me. I've lost my teaching position, and most businesses in town have made it clear I'm unwelcome." "So you're leaving?" It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow morning," she confirmed. "I have a cousin near Laramie with a homestead." He nodded thoughtfully, then surprised her by saying, "I'm headed in that direction myself. The roads aren't safe for a woman traveling alone these days." Madeline stiffened. "Mr. Irving, while I appreciate your assistance in the store, I'm perfectly capable, I don't doubt it," he interrupted, his tone respectful. "But there's safety in numbers, and I've been riding solo too long. Company would be welcome if you'll have it." She studied him warily. In her 22 years, Madeline had learned that offers of assistance from men often came with unspoken expectations. Yet something in Caleb Irving's steady gaze suggested he might be that rare exception, a man whose word was his bond. Why would you help someone you've just met? Someone the town has clearly marked as undesirable. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip a beat. "Because, Miss Walker, I've found that when an entire town turns against one person, especially a woman standing alone, it's rarely the lone soul who's in the wrong." He tipped his hat slightly. "Besides, my mother raised me to judge folks by their actions, not town gossip." Despite herself, Madeline found an answering smile tugging at her lips. "That's an uncommon philosophy, Mr. Irving." "Caleb," he corrected again. "And uncommon times call for uncommon thinking." He glanced around at the townspeople, pretending not to watch them. "Where are you staying tonight?" "I'd be happy to escort you back. I've taken a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house." She hesitated, then added, "It's the only place that would rent to me, and at twice the usual rate." Something flashed in his eyes, anger perhaps, but it was quickly masked. "Then I'll see you safely there, and we can discuss our departure time for tomorrow." As they walked together down the main street, Madeline felt the stairs burning into her back. Yet for the first time in weeks, she walked with lighter steps. Whatever the town thought of her, this stranger had offered kindness without condition, a rare commodity in the harsh landscape of the West. What she didn't know then was that Caleb Irving had secrets of his own secrets that would soon collide with hers in ways neither could imagine. The journey ahead would test not only her courage, but her conviction that honesty, painful as it might be, was always the right choice. Dawn had barely broken when Madeline slipped out of the boarding house, her single trunk and father's old saddle waiting on the porch. She'd spent a restless night wondering if Caleb Irving would keep his word and questioning her own wisdom in accepting his offer of escort. To her surprise and secret relief, she found him already waiting, his gelding saddled and a second horse, a dappled mare, tethered nearby. "Good morning," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "I took the liberty of acquiring transportation for you. The livery stable owner was surprisingly eager to sell at a fair price when I mentioned your name." Madeline approached the mare cautiously. "She's lovely, but I can't accept. Consider it a loan," Caleb interrupted smoothly. "My ranch outside Laramie needs good horses. You can repay me by delivering her there safely." She narrowed her eyes, suspecting this was merely a graceful way to help without wounding her pride. Still, necessity outweighed pride. The journey to Laramie would take days on foot. "Thank you," she said simply. They set out as the town was stirring to life, a few early risers pausing to stare as they rode past. Madeline kept her gaze fixed forward, though she couldn't help noticing how Caleb nodded politely to each person they passed, as if daring them to comment on his choice of traveling companion. Once Cottonwood Creek was little more than a smudge on the horizon behind them, Madeline felt the tension ease from her shoulders. The vast Wyoming landscape spread before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the spring grass waving in the breeze. "You ride well," Caleb observed after they'd been traveling in comfortable silence for nearly an hour. "My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons," she replied. "He taught me to ride, shoot, and read contracts before I was 12, a wise man. He was," she smiled at the memory. "He ran the newspaper in a small Kansas town. He believed truth was sacred, even when inconvenient." "Sounds like the apple didn't fall far from the tree," Caleb remarked. Madeline's smile faded. "Perhaps too close. His dedication to truth eventually forced us to leave Kansas when I was 16. He printed evidence of corruption involving the county judge, and suddenly we weren't welcome anymore. Yet you followed in his footsteps in Cottonwood Creek." "I didn't intend to cause trouble," she sighed. "Mayor Hargrove asked me directly if I thought his son would make my friend Harriet a good husband. He'd seen them arguing, I think, and wanted reassurance." She shook her head. "I simply couldn't lie, not when Harriet's future happiness was at stake." "What did you tell him?" "That Richard had gambling debts at every saloon in town, that he frequented the company of women at the Gilded Lily, and that he'd been borrowing money from Harriet's dowry without her knowledge." Madeline met his eyes steadily. All things the mayor could have discovered himself had he been willing to see the truth. Caleb whistled softly. "And instead of thanking you for saving his son from himself, he accused me of spreading malicious rumors to hurt his family's reputation." Her laugh held no humor. "The irony is, Harriet married Richard anyway. She was so embarrassed that everyone knew about his indiscretions that she blamed me instead of him." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves punctuating their thoughts. "Your honesty may have cost you Cottonwood Creek," Caleb finally said, "but I suspect you've gained something more valuable." "And what might that be?" "The freedom that comes with knowing you stayed true to yourself." His eyes, when they met hers, held unexpected warmth. "Some might call that foolish in this world, but I call it courage." The compliment caught her off guard, warming her cheeks. To cover her confusion, she asked, "What takes you to Laramie, Mr. Irving?" "Caleb," he corrected automatically. "I've been away too long from my responsibilities. I have a modest cattle operation north of Laramie that my foreman has been overseeing." His expression clouded slightly. "I was called away on family business." Something in his tone discouraged further questions, and Madeline respected the boundary. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept private. She of all people understood that. They made camp that evening by a small creek. Caleb proved himself adept at outdoor living, quickly building a fire and preparing a simple but satisfying meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee. As the twilight deepened into night, Madeline found herself studying him across the flames. There was an easy confidence to the way he moved, the mark of a man comfortable in his own skin. Yet occasionally she caught a shadow crossing his features, a hint of some burden carried silently. "You said your father believed in truth," Caleb said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. "Do you ever regret inheriting that trait from him?" Madeline considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I regret the consequences," she admitted, "but never the principle. Lies may offer temporary comfort, but they always demand payment eventually, usually with interest." He smiled at that. "My father used to say something similar. He'd tell me, son, a man who builds his life on lies lives in a house of cards." Sounds like another wise man. He was. Caleb poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward like fleeing stars. He died believing in honest dealings, even when those around him took shortcuts. The way he said it made Madeline wonder if there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she offered, "My father passed 3 years ago, pneumonia." His last words to me were, "Keep writing the truth, Maddie, no matter who tries to silence it." "And have you written the truth?" she smiled sadly. "Not for publication. After his death, I turned to teaching. But I've kept journals. Perhaps someday." "I'd read them," he said simply. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people who understood the cost of integrity in a world that often rewarded compromise. Madeline looked away first, suddenly aware of how intimate the conversation had become. "We should get some rest. We have many miles to cover tomorrow." Caleb nodded, but as she settled into her bedroll, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Interest mingled with something deeper, respect, perhaps. Whatever it was, it warmed her more thoroughly than the fire. Sleep claimed her eventually, and for the first time in months, no nightmares disturbed her rest. The journey continued for 3 more days, each mile bringing them closer to Laramie and, paradoxically, closer to each other. Conversation flowed easily between them, covering everything from literature to politics to their shared love of open spaces. Madeline found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn to Caleb's dry wit and thoughtful perspectives. By the 3rd evening, something had shifted between them. The casual glances lasted longer. Their hands occasionally brushed when passing items at mealtime, sending unexpected currents through her veins. Madeline told herself it was merely the intimacy of travel. 2 people sharing the trail would naturally develop a rapport. Yet when Caleb helped her down from her horse that evening, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, she couldn't dismiss the quickening of her pulse as mere companionship. "We should reach Laramie by midday tomorrow," he said as they set up camp. "From there, it's another half-day's ride to my ranch if you'd care to see it before continuing to your cousin's homestead." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "I would like that," she found herself saying, surprising them both. His smile in response made her heart flutter traitorously. This attraction was dangerous. She was starting anew, escaping one difficult situation. The last thing she needed was to complicate her future with feelings for a man she barely knew, regardless of how genuine he seemed. After dinner, they sat side by side, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The night was cool, and Caleb had gallantly offered his coat, which now draped around her shoulders, carrying his scent leather, pine, and something uniquely his own. "May I ask you something, Madeline?" His voice was quiet in the darkness. "Of course." "What will you do in Laramie? Will you seek another teaching position?" she sighed softly. "I'm not certain. My cousin has offered me a place to stay while I decide. Teaching is what I know, but after Cottonwood Creek." She shook her head. "I'm afraid my reputation may follow me. Small towns have long memories and faster telegraphs," Caleb agreed, "but Laramie is growing. New opportunities arise daily. Perhaps." She hugged her knees to her chest. "What about you? Will you return to your cattle operation and settle back into ranch life?" A complicated expression crossed his face. "That's my hope, yes, though there are matters I need to resolve first." "These mysterious matters that took you away from your ranch in the first place," she ventured. He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Madeline, there's something I should tell you, something that might change how you view our friendship." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "What is it?" Caleb looked directly into her eyes, his expression solemn. "I didn't arrive in Cottonwood Creek by accident. I came looking for you," her breath caught. "For me? Why? Because of what happened with Mayor Hargrove and his son." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as signaling discomfort. "Richard Hargrove isn't just the mayor's son, he's also the nephew of Senator James Hargrove of Wyoming Territory." "I don't understand. What does that have to do with you?" Caleb took a deep breath. "I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal, Madeline, or I was. I've been investigating the Hargroves for nearly a year. Corruption, land fraud, intimidation of settlers. Senator Hargrove has been using his position to acquire valuable properties throughout the territory by less than legal means. The revelation left her momentarily speechless. "You're a lawman," she finally managed. "Yes. When word reached me that someone in Cottonwood Creek had publicly accused Richard Hargrove of improprieties and then suffered retaliation, I thought you might be a potential witness. Someone brave enough to testify against the family." Madeline stood abruptly, letting his coat fall to the ground. "So all of this your help, your company, your—" She gestured vaguely between them. "Your interest, it was just to secure my testimony against the Hargroves." Caleb rose quickly, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "No, that's how it started, yes, but you lied to me," she interrupted, the hurt in her voice unmistakable. "All your talk about valuing honesty, and you've been deceiving me from the moment we met." "I never lied," he insisted. "I just didn't tell you everything. My ranch near Laramie is real. My feelings—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words, then continued more softly. "My feelings for you are real, Madeline. They've grown with every mile we've traveled together." She shook her head, unwilling to be swayed. "How can I believe that? How can I trust anything you say now? Because despite everything, I'm telling you the truth now at the risk of losing your good opinion." His eyes pleaded with her. "I could have kept my mission secret, used your testimony, and never revealed my original purpose. But I couldn't bear the thought of deceiving you any longer." Madeline turned away, wrapping her arms around herself as if for protection. The night air felt suddenly colder, the distance between them vast despite the mere feet separating them physically. "I think I've had enough truth for one evening," she said quietly. "Good night, Mr. Irving." She retreated to her bedroll, turning her back to him and the dying fire. Sleep eluded her as she tried to reconcile the man she'd come to care for with this new information. A marshal with ulterior motives. A man whose interest in her might be merely professional, despite his claims to the contrary. The irony wasn't lost on her. Cast out from one community for her honesty, only to be deceived by someone who'd claimed to value that very trait. Morning came too quickly, the rising sun illuminating a camp heavy with unspoken tension. They packed in silence, the easy camaraderie of previous days replaced by stiff formality. As they mounted their horses, Caleb finally broke the silence. "Madeline, I understand if you can't forgive me. But please, let me at least see you safely to your cousin's homestead." "That won't be necessary," she replied coldly. "I can find my own way from Laramie." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "As you wish." They rode side by side but worlds apart, the final miles to Laramie stretching endlessly. Madeline kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. She'd been foolish to trust so quickly, to imagine that a man like Caleb Irving could genuinely care for someone like her without an agenda. Yet even as hurt and betrayal clouded her thoughts, a quieter voice reminded her that he had chosen to tell her the truth, knowing it might cost him her regard. Was that not its own form of honesty? By midday, the outskirts of Laramie came into view. The town had grown significantly since Madeline had last visited years ago, with new buildings and businesses sprouting alongside the older establishments. Under different circumstances, she might have felt hopeful at the sight. Now, she merely felt relief that the journey and her time with Caleb was nearly over. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from locals unaccustomed to seeing the striking pair they made, the tall, handsome cowboy and the proud, beautiful woman beside him, both wearing expressions that discouraged approach. Near the town square, Caleb suddenly stiffened in his saddle. "Madeline, keep riding," he said urgently, his voice low. "Don't look around, just continue straight ahead." "What? Why, just trust me, please." Before she could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Well, look what we have here. Deputy Marshal Irving, as I live and breathe." Madeline turned despite Caleb's warning. 3 men had emerged from the saloon, the speaker a thin, well-dressed man with cold eyes and an artificial smile. Flanking him were 2 burlier companions, their hands hovering near holstered weapons. "Hargrove," Caleb acknowledged, his posture alert though his tone remained casual. "Didn't expect to see you in Laramie," Madeline's breath caught. This, then, was Senator James Hargrove, the man Caleb had been investigating. The uncle of the man whose reputation she had damaged with her honesty. The senator's gaze shifted to her, and his smile widened unpleasantly. "And Miss Walker, if I'm not mistaken. My nephew and brother have mentioned you, quite extensively." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Seems you've developed quite a talent for inserting yourself into Hargrove family business." Caleb moved his horse slightly, positioning himself between Madeline and the men. "The lady's not part of this, Hargrove. Your quarrel is with me." "On the contrary," the senator drawled. "When a schoolteacher starts spreading lies about my family, then falls in with a federal marshal investigating my affairs." He shrugged eloquently. "Well, that makes her very much part of this." People on the street had begun to notice the confrontation, some hurrying away while others watched from what they deemed safe distances. Madeline's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show fear. "I spread no lies," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the street. "Everything I said about Richard Hargrove was true, as his poor wife has likely discovered by now." The senator's face darkened. "You've got spirit, I'll grant you that, but spirit doesn't count for much against bullets." One of his companions moved his hand to his gun, and in a flash, Caleb had drawn his own weapon. "I wouldn't," he said softly, but the steel in his voice was unmistakable. "You're outnumbered, Irving," Hargrove said, "and outgunned. I have friends in this town, so do I." The new voice came from behind them, and Madeline turned to see a tall, gray-haired man wearing a sheriff's badge approaching, flanked by 2 deputies. "Senator Hargrove, I suggest you and your men move along. We don't take kindly to threats on our main street." The tension crackled in the air for several long moments before the senator laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Another time, then." His eyes locked with Caleb's. "This isn't over, Marshal." "No," Caleb agreed evenly. "It isn't." As the 3 men retreated back into the saloon, the sheriff approached. "Irving, you have a talent for finding trouble. Or it has a talent for finding me," Caleb replied, holstering his weapon. "Thanks for the timely intervention, Sheriff Morgan. Don't mention it." The older man turned his attention to Madeline. "Madam, I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Madeline Walker," she supplied, still shaken by the encounter. "I'm new to Laramie, and already acquainted with the Hargroves. That's unfortunate timing." He glanced between her and Caleb. "You 2 better come to my office. Seems we have matters to discuss." In the relative safety of the sheriff's office, Caleb explained the situation, his investigation into the Hargroves' corruption, how Madeline's experience in Cottonwood Creek fit into the pattern of intimidation he'd been documenting, and their journey to Laramie. Sheriff Morgan listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Caleb finished, he leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "The Hargroves have powerful friends, even here in Laramie," he said. "I can offer some protection while you're in town, but I'd advise against either of you traveling alone for the foreseeable future." Madeline, who had remained largely silent during Caleb's explanation, finally spoke. "My cousin's homestead is a day's ride from here." "I had planned to go there immediately." The sheriff shook his head. "Not safe, Miss Walker, not with Hargrove's men watching the roads. They'd follow you and potentially endanger your family as well." "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, frustration edging her voice. "My ranch," Caleb said quietly. "It's defensible, well-staffed, and my foreman is a former Texas Ranger. You'd be safe there until we can resolve this situation." Madeline met his gaze, conflict evident in her eyes. The prospect of staying at Caleb's ranch, continuing in his company, despite her sense of betrayal, warred with practical concerns for her safety and the reality of the danger the Hargroves represented. I have documentation at the ranch, Caleb continued. Evidence I've been gathering against the Hargroves. With your testimony about what happened in Cottonwood Creek, we might finally have enough to bring formal charges. And then what? She asked. Even if the Hargroves face justice, what becomes of me? My reputation is already in tatters. The truth has a way of vindicating those who stand by it, Sheriff Morgan observed, especially when the liars are exposed. Madeline considered this, then turned to Caleb. If I agree to this, I want complete honesty from now on. No more hidden agendas, no more partial truths. You have my word, he said solemnly. Your honesty inspired me to be brave enough to tell you the truth last night, even knowing it might cost me your regard. I won't fail that standard again. Something in his expression, earnest, vulnerable, reached past her defenses. She nodded slowly. Very well, I'll go to your ranch, Mr. Irving, for safety's sake. Caleb, he corrected gently. Please. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Caleb. They departed Laramie under escort from Sheriff Morgan's deputies, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. The journey to Caleb's ranch took longer than expected, the sun beginning to set as they crested a hill overlooking a verdant valley nestled between protective ridges. Below, a substantial ranch house of hewn logs and stone stood surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and grazing land. Smoke rose from the chimney and lanterns were being lit as evening approached. Welcome to Honesty Creek Ranch, Caleb said quietly. Madeline raised an eyebrow. Truly, that's its name, he smiled, a touch of self-consciousness in the expression. Named by my father. He believed in calling things what they were. It's beautiful, she admitted, taking in the peaceful scene below. I can see why you were eager to return. Not just for the land, he said, his eyes on her rather than the ranch. I've come to realize that home isn't just a place. The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them, but before Madeline could respond, riders approached from the ranch, two men, moving at a steady clip up the hillside. That'll be my foreman, Marcus, Caleb explained, and probably young David, one of our hands. They're likely wondering who's approaching at this hour. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. Marcus Donovan, the foreman, proved to be a taciturn but respectful man who accepted Caleb's abbreviated version of events without question. Madeline was shown to a comfortable guest room in the main house, where a motherly housekeeper named Mrs. Beckett fussed over her travel-worn appearance and promised a hot bath and meal. Later, refreshed and changed into a clean dress she'd salvaged from her trunk, Madeline joined Caleb in the ranch house's cozy dining room. The table was set for two, candles casting a warm glow over simple but elegant furnishings that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. You have a lovely home, she observed as he held her chair. Thank you. He took his own seat across from her. It was my parents' dream. They homesteaded this land when there was nothing but wild grass and hope. And now it's one of the most productive cattle operations in the territory. There was pride in his voice, but no boasting. Though I've been away too often in recent years, serving as marshal. Mrs. Beckett served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, then discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with their thoughts and the soft crackle of the fire in the nearby hearth. Why did you become a marshal? Madeline asked after they'd eaten in silence for several minutes. With all this to manage, it seems an unusual choice. Caleb set down his fork, his expression growing serious. 5 years ago, a rancher friend of mine lost everything: his land, his cattle, even his family's safety, because he refused to sell to Senator Hargrove's development company. The local law did nothing. The territorial courts were in Hargrove's pocket. He shook his head. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen to others, so I sought a federal appointment, thinking perhaps the law could work if someone was willing to enforce it impartially. That's admirable, she admitted, not entirely. His smile held a touch of self-reproach. There was pride involved too, and anger, not the purest of motivations. But honest ones, Madeline pointed out, and honesty matters more than perfection. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a renewal of the connection that had been building during their journey, now tempered by a deeper understanding. "Madeline," Caleb began, his voice low and earnest, "I want you to know that while I initially sought you out because of your experience with the Hargroves, that's not why I asked you to come here." "Why did you then?" she asked softly. "Because in 4 days of traveling with you, I've come to admire your courage, your principles, your intelligence." His eyes never left hers. "Because when I think of this ranch, of building a future here, I can no longer imagine it without you in it." Her breath caught. "Caleb, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know that you value truth above convenience. I know that you're willing to bear the consequences of your convictions. I know that when I'm with you, I'm a better version of myself." He reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that your honesty isn't a burden to be borne but a crown to be treasured." Slowly, Madeline placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers as they closed gently around hers. "Your honesty is my crown," she repeated thoughtfully. "What does that mean?" "It means that what others have cast aside I recognize as precious." His thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "It means that I see your worth, Madeline Walker, not despite your honesty but because of it." The days that followed took on a rhythm: mornings spent helping Caleb organize his evidence against the Hargroves, afternoons exploring the ranch, evenings filled with conversation by the fire. Madeline sent word to her cousin of her whereabouts, receiving a relieved reply that the homestead had indeed been watched by strangers who'd since departed. A week passed, then 2. Spring deepened toward summer, the Wyoming landscape bursting with new life. And as nature renewed itself around them, something blossomed between Madeline and Caleb, tentative at first, then growing stronger with each passing day. They spoke of everything: hopes, fears, dreams, disappointments. She learned of his childhood on the ranch, the loss of his parents to a fever that swept through the territory, his determination to build on their legacy. He learned of her early years in Kansas, her father's influence on her values, her love of teaching despite its challenges. And gradually, the walls between them crumbled, replaced by a foundation of mutual respect and deepening affection. On a warm evening 3 weeks after their arrival, they rode together to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. Wildflowers painted the landscape in splashes of color, and the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. "I received a telegram from Sheriff Morgan today," Caleb said as they dismounted. "The federal prosecutor believes we have enough evidence to bring charges against Senator Hargrove and his brother. They've issued warrants for their arrest." "That's wonderful news," Madeline exclaimed, genuine relief in her voice. "When will they be apprehended?" "Morgan thinks within days. They're watching all the likely routes out of the territory." He took her hands in his. "Which means you'll soon be free to continue to your cousins if that's still your wish." The thought, which once would have brought comfort, now filled her with an unexpected hollowness. I'm not certain that is my wish anymore." Hope flared in his eyes. "What is your wish then, Madeline?" She looked around at the beautiful land spreading below them, then back to the man who'd come to mean so much to her in such a short time. "To find a place where honesty isn't just tolerated but valued, where I can build something meaningful, something lasting." "You could find that here," he said quietly, drawing her closer. "With me." Her heart raced as his arms encircled her waist. "Are you certain?" "I've been known to speak inconvenient truths. I'm counting on it." His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I need someone who'll tell me when I'm being stubborn or short-sighted, someone who'll keep me honest." "In that case," she murmured, "I should honestly tell you that I believe I'm falling in love with you, Caleb Irving." Joy bloomed across his features. "And I should honestly tell you that I'm already in love with you, Madeline Walker." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "May I kiss you? Honestly, I've been wanting to since the moment I saw you in Galloway's store." Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as she wrapped her arms around his neck, surrendering to the feelings she'd been holding at bay. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the sun had slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. "I think," Caleb said softly, his forehead resting against hers, "that we should discuss a more permanent arrangement, if you'll have me." "I believe I would," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "Though I warn you, a lifetime with me means a lifetime of unvarnished truth. I'd have it no other way." His eyes, reflecting the last light of day, held promises that needed no words. "Your honesty is my crown, Madeline, the most precious jewel in my life." As they rode back to the ranch, hand in hand in the gathering twilight, Madeline reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here, cast aside for her honesty in one place, only to find it cherished beyond measure in another. The path had been difficult, painful at times, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. And that, she thought with a smile as Caleb helped her down from her horse, was the most honest truth of all.